The Three Railway Engines, Edward and Gordon. One of the engines in Edward's shed was called Gordon. He was very big and very proud. "You watch me this afternoon, little Edward," he boasted, "as I rush through with the express. That will be a splendid sight for you." Just then his driver pulled the lever. "Goodbye, little Edward," said Gordon as he puffed away. "Look out for me this afternoon." Edward went off too, to do some shunting. Edward liked shunting. It was fun playing with trucks. He would come up quietly and give them a pull. "Oh, oh, oh, oh!" screamed the trucks. "Whatever is happening?" Then he would stop and the silly trucks would go bump into each other. "Oh, oh, oh, oh!" they cried again. Edward pushed them until they were running nicely, and when they weren't expecting it, he would stop. One of them would be sure to run on to another line. Edward played till there were no more trucks. Then he stopped to rest. Presently he heard a whistle. Gordon came puffing along very slowly and very crossly. Instead of nice shining coaches, he was pulling a lot of very dirty coal trucks. "A goods train, a goods train, a goods train," he grumbled. "The shame of it, the shame of it, the shame of it." He went slowly through with the trucks clattering and banging behind him. Edward laughed and went to find some more trucks. Soon afterwards a porter came and spoke to his driver. "Gordon can't get up the hill. Will you take Edward and push him, please?" They found Gordon halfway up the hill and very cross. His driver and fireman were talking to him severely. "You're not trying," they told him. "I can't do it," said Gordon. "The noisy trucks hold an engine back so. If they were coaches, now clean, sensible things that come quietly, that would be different." Edward's driver came up. "We've come to push," he said. "No use at all," said Gordon. "You wait and see," said Edward's driver. They brought the train back to the bottom of the hill. Edward came up behind the brake van ready to push. "Peep, peep, I'm ready," said Edward. "Boop, boop, no good," grumbled Gordon. The guard blew his whistle and they pulled and pushed as hard as they could. "I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it," puffed Gordon. "I will do it, I will do it, I will do it," puffed Edward. "I can't do it, I will do it, I can't do it, I will do it, I can't do it, I will do it," they puffed together. Edward pushed and puffed and puffed and pushed as hard as ever he could, and almost before he realised it, Gordon found himself at the top of the hill. I've done it, he said proudly, and forgot all about Edward pushing behind. He didn't even wait to say thank you, but ran on so fast that he passed 2 stations before his driver could make him stop. Edward had pushed so hard that when he got to the top he was out of breath. Gordon ran on so fast that Edward was left behind. The guard waved and waved, but Edward couldn't catch up. He ran on to the next station, and there the driver and fireman said they were very pleased with him. The fireman gave him a nice long drink of water, and the driver said, "I'll get out my paint tomorrow and give you a beautiful new coat of blue with red stripes. Then you'll be the smartest engine in the shed." Thomas the Tank Engine. Thomas and the Trucks. Thomas used to grumble in the shed at night. "I'm tired of pushing coaches. I want to see the world." The others didn't take much notice, for Thomas was a little engine with a long tongue. But one night Edward came to the shed. He was a kind little engine and felt sorry for Thomas. "I've got some trucks to take home tomorrow," he told him. "If you take them instead, I'll push coaches in the yard." "Thank you," said Thomas. "That will be nice." So they asked their drivers next morning, and when they said yes, Thomas ran off happily to find trucks. Now trucks are silly and noisy. They talk a lot and don't attend to what they are doing. They don't listen to their engine, and when he stops they bump into each other screaming, "Oh, oh, 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 whatever is happening?" And I'm sorry to say they play tricks on an engine who is not used to them. Edward knew all about trucks. He warned Thomas to be careful, but Thomas was too excited to listen. The shunter fastened the coupling, and when the signal dropped, Thomas was ready. The guard blew his whistle. "Peep, peep," answered Thomas, and started off. But the trucks weren't ready. "Oh, oh, oh, oh," they screamed as their couplings tightened. "Wait, Thomas, wait." But Thomas wouldn't wait. Come on, he puffed, and the trucks grumbled slowly out of the siding onto the main line. Thomas was happy. Come along, he puffed. All right, don't fuss, grumbled the trucks. They clattered through stations and rumbled over bridges. Thomas whistled, "Beep, beep," and they rushed through the tunnel in which Henry had been shut up. Then they came to the top of the hill where Gordon had stuck. "Steady now, steady," warned the driver, and he shut off steam and began to put on the brakes. We're stopping," called Thomas. "No, no, no, no," answered the trucks, and bumped into each other. Go on, go on!" And before his driver could stop them, they had pushed Thomas down the hill, and were rattling and laughing behind him. Poor Thomas tried hard to stop them from making him go too fast. Stop pushing, he hissed, but the trucks would not stop. Go on, they giggled in their silly way. He was glad when they got to the bottom. Then he saw in front the place where they had to stop. "Oh dear, what shall I do?" They rattled through the station, and luckily the line was clear as they swerved into the goods yard. "Whoa!" groaned Thomas as his brakes held fast and he skidded along the rails. "I must stop!" and he shut his eyes tight. When he opened them, he saw he had just stopped in front of the buffers, and there watching him was the fat director. "What are you doing here, Thomas?" he asked sternly. "I've bought Edward's trucks," Thomas answered. "Why did you come so fast?" "I didn't mean to, I was pushed," said Thomas sadly. "Haven't you pulled trucks before?" "No." "Then you've a lot to learn about trucks, little Thomas. They are silly things and must be kept in their place. After pushing them about here for a few weeks, you'll know almost as much about them as Edward. Then you'll be a really useful engine." James the Red Engine. James and the Bootlace. One morning the fat controller spoke severely to James. "If you can't behave, I shall take away your red coat and have you painted blue." James did not like that at all, and he was very rough with the coaches as he brought them to the platform. Come along, he called rudely. All in good time, the coaches grumbled. "Don't talk, come on," answered James, and with the coaches squealing and grumbling after him, he snorted into the station. James was cross that morning. The fat controller had spoken to him, the coaches had dawdled, and worst of all, he had to fetch his own coaches. "Gordon never does," thought James, "and he is only painted blue. A splendid red engine like me should never have to fetch his own coaches." And he puffed and snorted round to the front of the train and backed onto it with a rude bump. "Oh," groaned the coaches, "that was too bad." To make James even more cross, he then had to take the coaches to a different platform where no one came near him as he stood there. The fat controller was in his office, the station master was at the other end of the train with the guard, and even the little boys stood a long way off. James felt lonely. "I'll show them," he said to himself. "They think Gordon is the only engine who can pull coaches." And as soon as the guard's whistle blew, he started off with a tremendous jerk. Come on, he puffed, and the coaches, squeaking and groaning in protest, clattered over to the points onto the open line. Hurry, puffed James. You're going too fast, said the coaches, and indeed they were going so fast that they swayed from side to side. James laughed and tried to go faster, but the coaches wouldn't let him. We're going to stop, they said, and James found himself going slower and slower. What's the matter? James asked his driver. The brakes are hard on, leak in the pipe most likely. You've banged the coaches enough to make a leak in anything. The guard and the driver got down and looked at the brake pipes all along the train. At last they found a hole where rough treatment had made a joint work loose. How shall we mend it? Said the guard. James' driver thought for a moment. We'll do it with newspapers and a leather bootlace. Well, where is the bootlace coming from? Asked the guard. We haven't one. Ask the passengers, said the driver. So the guard made everyone get out. Has anybody got a leather bootlace? He asked. They all said no, except one man in a bowler hat, whose name was Jeremiah Jobling, who tried to hide his feet. You have a leather bootlace there, I see, sir, said the guard. Please give it to me. I won't, said Jeremiah Jobling. Then, said the guard sternly, I'm afraid this train will just stop where it is. Then the passengers all told the guard, the driver and the fireman what a bad railway it was, but the guard climbed into his van and the driver and fireman made James let off steam, so they all told Jeremiah Jobling he was a bad man instead. At last he gave them his laces. The driver tied a pad of newspapers tightly round the hole, and James was able to pull the train. But he was a sadder and wiser James, and took care never to bump coaches again. Tank Engine Thomas again. Thomas goes fishing. Thomas's branch line had a station by a river. As he rumbled over the bridge, he would see people fishing. Sometimes they stood quietly by their lines, sometimes they were actually jerking fish out of the water. Thomas often wanted to stay and watch, but his driver said, "No, what would the Fat Controller say if we were late?" Thomas thought it would be lovely to stop by the river. "I should like to go fishing," he said to himself longingly. Every time he met another engine he would say, "I want to fish." They all answered the same. "Engines don't go fishing. Silly stick in the muds," he would snort impatiently. Thomas generally had to take in water at the station by the river. One day he stopped as usual and his fireman put the pipe from the water tower in his tank. Then he turned the tap, but it was out of order and no water came. "Bother," said Thomas, "I am thirsty." "Never mind," said his driver, "we'll get some water from the river." They found a bucket and some rope and went to the bridge. Then the driver let the bucket down to the water. The bucket was old and had 5 holes, so they had to fill it up, pull it up and empty it into Thomas's tank as quickly as they could. "There's a hole in my bucket, dear Liza," sang the fireman. "Never you mind about Liza," said the driver. "You empty that bucket before you spill the water over me." They finished at last. That's good, puffed Thomas, as he started and Annie and Clarabelle ran happily behind. They puffed along the valley and were in the tunnel when Thomas began to feel a pain in his boiler, while steam hissed from his safety valve in an alarming way. "There's too much steam," said his driver, and his fireman opened the tap in the feed pipe to let more water into the boiler, but none came. "Oh dear," groaned Thomas, I'm going to burst. They damped down his fire and struggled on. I've got such a pain, Thomas hissed. Just outside the last station they stopped, uncoupled Annie and Clarabelle, and ran Thomas, who was still hissing fit to burst, onto a siding right out of the way. Then while the guard telephoned for an engine inspector and the fireman was putting out the fire, the driver wrote notices in large letters, which he hung on Thomas in front and behind. "Danger, keep away." Soon the inspector and the Fat Controller arrived. "Cheer up, Thomas," they said, "we'll soon put you right." The driver told them what had happened. "So the feed pipe is blocked," said the inspector. "I'll just look in the tanks." He climbed up and peered in. Then he came down. "Excuse me, sir," he said to the Fat Controller. "Please look in the tank and tell me what you see." "Certainly, Inspector." He clambered up, looked in, and nearly fell off in surprise. "Inspector," he whispered, "can you see fish?" "Goodness gracious me," said the Fat Controller. "How did the fish get there, driver?" Thomas's driver scratched his head. "We must have fished them from the river," and he told them about the bucket. The Fat Controller laughed. "Well, Thomas, so you and your driver have been fishing, but fish don't shoot you, and we must get them out." So the driver and the fireman fetched rods and nets, and they all took turns at fishing in Thomas's tank, while the Fat Controller told them how to do it. When they had caught all the fish, the station master gave them some potatoes, the driver borrowed a frying pan, while the fireman made a fire beside the line and did the cooking. Then they all had a lovely picnic supper of fish and chips. "That was good," said the Fat Controller as he finished his share, "but fish don't shoot you, Thomas, so you mustn't do it again." "No, sir, I won't," said Thomas sadly. "Engines don't go fishing. It's too uncomfortable." Troublesome Engines. Trouble in the shed. The Fat Controller sat in his office and listened to the noise outside. The Fat Controller frowned and said, "What a nuisance passengers are. How can I work with all this noise?" The station master knocked and came in, looking worried. "There's trouble in the shed, sir. Henry is sulking, there is no train, and the passengers are saying this is a bad railway." "Indeed," said the Fat Controller, "we cannot allow that. Will you quieten the passengers, please? I will go and speak to Henry." He found Henry, Gordon and James looking sulky. "Come along, Henry," he said. "It is time your train was ready." "Henry's not going," said Gordon rudely. "We won't shunt like common tank engines. We are important tender engines. You fetch our coaches and we will pull them. Tender engines don't shunt." And all 3 engines let off steam in a cheeky way. "Oh, indeed," said the Fat Controller severely. "We'll see about that. Engines on my railway do as they are told." And he hurried away, climbed into his car and drove to find Edward. "The yard has never been the same since Thomas left," he thought sadly. Edward was shunting. "Leave those trucks, please, Edwards. I want you to push coaches for me in the yard." "Thank you, sir. That will be a nice change." "That's a good engine," said the Fat Controller kindly. "Off you go, then." So Edward found coaches for the 3 engines, and that day the trains ran as usual. But when the Fat Controller came next morning, Edward looked unhappy. Gordon came clanking past, hissing rudely. "Bless me," said the Fat Controller, "what a noise!" "They all hiss me, sir," answered Edward sadly. "They say tender engines don't shunt, and last night they said I had black wheels. I haven't, have I, sir?" "No, Edward, you have nice blue ones, and I'm proud of you. Tender engines do shunt, but all the same you'd be happier in your own yard. We need a tank engine here." He went to an engine workshop, and they showed him all sorts of tank engines. There were big ones and little ones. Some looked happy, and some sad, and some looked at him anxiously, hoping he would choose them. At last he saw a smart little green engine with 4 wheels. "That's the one," he thought. "If I choose you, will you work hard?" "Oh, sir, yes, sir." "That's a good engine. I'll call you Percy." "Yes, sir, thank you, sir," said Percy happily. So he bought Percy and drove him back to the yard. "Edward," he called, "here's Percy. Will you show him everything?" Percy soon learned what he had to do, and they had a happy afternoon. Once Henry came hissing as usual. "Wheesh!" said Percy suddenly. Henry jumped and ran back to the shed. "How beautiful! You wheeshed him," laughed Edward. "I can't wheesh like that." "Oh," said Percy modestly, "there's nothing. You should hear them in the workshop. You have to wheesh loudly to make yourself heard." Next morning Thomas arrived. "The Fat Controller sent for me. I expect he wants help," he said importantly to Edward. "Shh, shh, here he comes." "Well done, Thomas. You've been quick. Listen, Henry, Gordon and James are sulking. They say they won't shunt like common tank engines, so I've shut them up, and I want you to both run the line." "Common tank engines indeed," snorted Thomas. "We'll show them." "And Percy here will help too," said the Fat Controller. "Oh, sir, yes, sir, please, sir," answered Percy excitedly. Edward and Thomas worked the main line. Starting at opposite ends, they pulled the trains, whistling cheerfully to each other as they passed. Percy sometimes puffed along the branch line. Thomas was anxious, but both driver and guard promised to take care of Annie and Clarabel. There were fewer trains, but the passengers didn't mind. They knew the 3 other engines were having a lesson. Henry, Gordon and James stayed shut in the shed, and were cold, lonely and miserable. They wished now they hadn't been so silly. Henry the green engine. Coal. "I suffer dreadfully, and no one cares." "Rubbish, Henry," snorted James. "You don't work hard enough." Henry was bigger than James, but smaller than Gordon. Sometimes he could pull trains, but sometimes he had no strength at all. The Fat Controller spoke to him too. "You are too expensive, Henry. You've had lots of new parts and new paint too, but they've done you no good. If we can't make you better, we must get another engine instead of you." This made Henry, his driver and his fireman very sad. The Fat Controller was waiting when Henry came to the platform. He had taken off his hat and coat and put on overalls. He climbed to the footplate and Henry started. "Henry is a bad steamer," said the fireman. "I build up his fire, but it doesn't give off enough heat." Henry tried very hard, but it was no good. He had not enough steam, and they stopped outside Edward Station. "Oh dear," thought Henry sadly, "I shall have to go away." Edward took charge of the train. Henry stopped behind. "What do you think is wrong, fireman?" asked the Fat Controller. The fireman mopped his face. "Excuse me, sir," he answered, "but the coal is wrong. We've had a poor lot lately, and today it's worse. The other engines can manage. They have big fireboxes. Henry's is small and can't make the heat. With Welsh coal he'd be a different engine." "It's expensive," said the Fat Controller thoughtfully, "but Henry must have a fair chance. James shall go and fetch some." When the Welsh coal came, Henry's driver and fireman were excited. "Now we'll show them, Henry, old fellow." They carefully oiled all his joints and polished his brass till it shone like gold. His fire had already been lit, so the fireman made it carefully. He put large lumps of coal like a wall round the outside, then he covered the glowing middle part with smaller lumps. "You're spoiling my fire," complained Henry. "Wait and see," said the fireman. "We'll have a roaring fire, just when we want it." He was right. When Henry reached the platform, the water was boiling nicely, and he had to let off steam, to show how happy he was. He made such a noise that the Fat Controller came out to see him. "How are you, Henry?" "Beep, beep," whistled Henry. "I feel fine." "Have you a good fire, driver?" Never better, sir, and plenty of steam. No wreck or breaking, warned the Fat Controller, smiling. Don't push him too hard. Henry won't need pushing, sir. I'll have to hold him back. Henry had a lovely day. He had never felt so well in his life. He wanted to go fast, but his driver wouldn't let him. Steady, old fellow, he would say. There's plenty of time. They arrived early at the junction. Where have you been, lazybones? Asked Henry when Thomas puffed in. Oh, I can't wait for dawdling tank engines like you. Goodbye. Whoosh, said Thomas to Annie and Clarabelle as Henry disappeared. Have you ever seen anything like it? Both Annie and Clarabelle agreed that they never had. Toby the Tram Engine. Dirty Objects. Toby and Henrietta take the workmen to the quarry every morning. At the junction they often meet James. Toby and Henrietta were shabby when they first came and needed new paint. James was very rude. Ugh, what dirty objects, he would say. At last Toby lost patience. James, he asked, why are you red? I'm a splendid engine, answered James loftily. Ready for anything. You never see my paint dirty. Oh, said Toby innocently, that's why you once needed bootlaces, to be ready, I suppose. James went redder than ever and snorted off. At the end of the line, James left his coaches and got ready for his next train. It was a slow goods, stopping at every station to pick up and set down trucks. James hated slow goods trains. Dirty trucks from dirty sidings. Ugh, he grumbled. Starting with only a few, he picked up more and more trucks at each station till he had a long train. At first the trucks behaved well, but James bumped them so crossly that they were determined to pay him out. Presently, rumbling over the viaduct, they approached the top of Gordon's Hill. Heavy goods trains halt here to pin down their brakes. James had had an accident with trucks before and should have remembered this. Wait, James, wait, said his driver, but James wouldn't wait. He was too busy thinking what he would say to Toby when they next met. Too late, he saw where he was and tried to stop. Hurrah, hurrah, laughed the trucks, and banging their buffers, they pushed him down the hill. The guard tightened his brakes until they screamed. On, yelled the trucks. I've got to stop, groaned James, and setting his brakes he managed to check the trucks' mad rush, but they were still going much too fast to stop in time. Through the station they thundered and lurched into the yard. James shut his eyes. There was a bursting crash, and something sticky splashed all over him. He had run into 2 tar wagons, and was black from smoke box to cab. James was more dirty than hurt, but the tar wagons and some of the trucks were all to pieces. The breakdown train was in the yard, and they soon tidied up the mess. Toby and Percy were sent to help, and came as quickly as they could. Look here, Percy, exclaimed Toby, whatever is that dirty object? That's James, didn't you know? It's James's shape, said Toby thoughtfully, but James is a splendid red engine, and you never see his paint dirty. James shut his eyes and pretended he hadn't heard. They cleared away the unhurt trucks and helped James home. The Fat Controller met them. Well done, Percy and Toby, he said. He turned to James. Fancy letting your trucks run away. I am surprised. You are not fit to be seen. You must be cleaned at once. Toby shall have a coat of paint. Chocolate and blue, I think. Please, sir, can Henrietta have one too? Certainly, Toby, he smiled. She shall have brown, like Annie and Clarabelle. Oh, thank you, sir. She will be pleased. Toby ran home happily to tell her the news. Gordon the Big Engine. Down the mine. One day Thomas was at the junction when Gordon shuffled in with some trucks. Puff, remarked Thomas. What a funny smell. Can you smell a smell? I can't smell a smell, said Annie and Clarabelle. A funny musty sort of smell, said Thomas. No one noticed it till you did, grunted Gordon. It must be yours. Annie, Clarabelle, do you know what I think it is? Whispered Thomas loudly. It's ditch water. Gordon snorted, but before he could answer, Thomas puffed quickly away. Annie and Clarabelle could hardly believe their ears. He's dreadfully rude. I feel quite ashamed. He's dreadfully rude, they twittered to each other. You mustn't be rude. You make us ashamed, they kept telling Thomas. But Thomas didn't care a bit. That was funny, he chuckled. He felt very pleased with himself. Annie and Clarabelle were deeply shocked. They had a great respect for Gordon the Big Engine. Thomas left the coaches at a station and went off to a mine for some trucks. Long ago, miners digging for lead had made tunnels under the ground. Though strong enough to hold up trucks, their roofs could not bear the weight of engines. A large notice said, "Danger! Engines must not pass this board." Thomas had often been warned, but he didn't care. Silly old board, he thought. He had often tried to pass it, but had never succeeded. This morning he laughed as he puffed along. He had made a plan. He had to push empty trucks into one siding and pull out full ones from another. His driver stopped him, and the fireman went to turn the points. "Come on," waved the fireman, and they started. The driver leaned out of the cab to see where they were going. "Now," said Thomas to himself, and bumping the trucks fiercely, he jerked his driver off the footplate. "Hurrah!" laughed Thomas, and he followed the trucks into the siding. "Stupid old board," said Thomas as he passed it. "There's no danger, there's no danger." His driver, unhurt, jumped up. "Look out!" he shouted. The fireman clambered into the cab. Thomas squealed crossly as his brakes were applied. "It's quite safe," he hissed. "Come back!" yelled the driver. But before they could move there was rumbling, and the rails quivered. The fireman jumped clear. As he did so, the ballast slipped away and the rails sagged and broke. "Fire and smoke," said Thomas. "I'm sunk." And he was. Thomas could just see out of the hole, but he couldn't move. "Oh dear," he said, "I am a silly engine." "And you're very naughty one too," said a voice behind him. "I assure you." "Please get me out. I won't be naughty again." "I'm not sure," replied the fat controller. "We can't lift you out of a crane. The ground's not firm enough." Let me see. I wonder if Gordon could pull you out." "Yes, sir," said Thomas nervously, but he didn't want to meet Gordon just yet. "Down a mine, is he? Ho, ho, ho," laughed Gordon. "What a joke, what a joke." He chortled, puffing to the rescue. "Up, up, little Thomas," he whistled. "We'll have you out in a couple of puffs." Strong cables were fastened between the two engines. "Are you ready?" "Heave!" called the fat controller. But they didn't pull Thomas out in 2 puffs. Gordon was panting hard and nearly purple before he had dragged Thomas out of the hold and safely past the board. "I'm sorry I was cheeky," said Thomas. "That's all right, Thomas. You made me laugh. I like that. I'm in disgrace," Gordon went on pathetically. "I feel very low." "I'm in disgrace too," said Thomas. "Why, so you are, Thomas. We're both in disgrace. Shall we form an alliance?" What was it? "An alliance, Thomas. United we stand, together we fall," said Gordon grandly. "You help me, and I help you. How about it?" "Right you are," said Thomas. "Good, that's settled," rumbled Gordon. And buffer to buffer the Allies puffed home. Edward the Blue Engine, Bertie's Chase. "Peep, peep, we're late," fussed Edward. "Peep, peep, 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 where is Thomas? He doesn't usually make us wait." "Oh dear, what can the matter be?" sang the fireman. "Johnny's so long at—" "Never you mind about Johnny," laughed the driver. "Just you climb on the cab and look for Thomas." "Can you see him?" "No." The guard looked at his watch. 10 minutes late," he said to the driver. "We can't wait here all day." "Look again, Sid," said the driver, "just in case." The fireman got to his feet. "Can you see him?" "No," he answered. "There's Bertie Buss in a tearing hurry. No need to bother with him, though. Likely he's on a coach tour or something." He clambered down. "Right away, Charlie," said the guard, and Edward puffed off. "Doot, doot, doot, stop, stop," wailed Bertie, roaring into the yard. But it was no good. Edward's last coach had disappeared into the tunnel. "Bother," said Bertie. "Bother Thomas's fireman not coming to work today. Oh, why did I promise to help the passengers catch the train?" "That will do, Bertie," said his driver. "A promise is a promise, and we must keep it." "I'll catch Edward or bust," said Bertie grimly, as he raced along the road. "Oh, my gears and axles," he groaned, toiling up the hill. "I'll never be the same bus again." "Doot, doot, 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 I see him, hooray, hooray," he cheered, as he reached the top of the hill. "He's reached the station." Bertie groaned the next minute. "No, he's stopped by a signal. Hooray, hooray," and he tore down the hill, his brakes squealing at the corners. His passengers bounced like balls in a bucket. "Well done, Bertie," they shouted. "Go it, go it." Hens and dogs scattered in all directions as he raced through the village. Wait, wait, he tooted, skidding into the yard. He was just in time to see the signal drop, the guard wave his flag, and Edward puff off out of the station. His passengers rushed to the platform, but it was no good, and they came bustling back. "I'm sorry," said Bertie unhappily. "Never mind, Bertie," they said. "After him quickly, third time lucky, you know. Do you think we'll catch him at the next station, driver?" "There's a good chance," he answered. "Our road keeps close to the line, and we can climb hills better than Edward." He thought for a minute. "I'll just make sure." He then spoke to the station master, while the passengers waited impatiently in the bus. "This hill is too steep, this hill is too steep," grumbled the coaches as Edward snorted in front. They reached the top at last and ran smoothly into the station. "Peep, peep," whistled Edward. "Get in quickly, please." The porters and people hurried, and Edward impatiently waited to start. "Peep," whistled the guard, and Edward's driver looked back, but the flag didn't wave. There was a distant toot toot, and the station master running across snatched the green flag out of the guard's hand. Then everything seemed to happen at once. "Toot toot," bellowed Bertie. His passengers poured onto the platform and scrambled into the station. The station master told the guard and driver what had happened, and Edward listened. "I'm sorry about the chase, Bertie," he said. "My fault," panted Bertie. "Late at junction. You didn't know about Thomas's passengers." "Peep, peep, goodbye, Bertie, we're off," whistled Edward. "Three cheers for Bertie," called the passengers. They cheered and waved until they were out of sight. 4 Little Engines, Peter Sam and the Refreshment Lady. As Sir Handel was shut up, Peter Sam had to run the line. He was excited, and the fireman found him hard to get him ready. "Sober up, can't you?" he growled. "Anybody would think," said Sir Handel rudely, "that he wanted to work." "All respectable engines do," said Skarloey firmly. "I wish I could work myself. Keep calm, Peter Sam. Don't get excited, and you'll do very well." But Peter Sam was in such a state that he couldn't listen. When his driver came, Peter Sam ran along to fetch the coaches. "Beep! Come along, girls," he whistled, and although he was so excited he remembered to be careful. "That's the way, my dears, gently does it." "What did he say?" asked Jemima, who was deaf. "He said, 'Come along, girls,' and he called us his dears," simpered the other coaches. Really, one does not know what to think. Such a handsome young engine, so nice, well-mannered, and they tittered happily together as they followed Peter Sam. Peter Sam fussed into the station to find Henry already there. "This won't do, youngster," said Henry. "I can't be kept waiting. If you are late tonight, I'll go off and leave your passengers behind." "Pah!" said Peter Sam, but secretly he was a little worried. But he couldn't feel worried for long. "What fun it all is," he thought. As he ran around his train, he let off steam happily while he waited for the guard to blow his whistle and wave his green flag. Peter Sam puffed happily away, singing a little song. "I'm Peter Sam, I'm running this line, I'm Peter Sam, I'm running this line." The people waved as he passed the farms and cottages, and he gave a loud whistle at the school. The children all ran to see him puffing by. Agnes, Ruth, Jemima, Lucy and Beatrice enjoyed themselves too. "He's cocky, but he's nice, truck, truck, but he's nice, truck, truck, but he's nice, chop, chop," they sang as they trundled along. They were growing fond of Peter Sam. Every afternoon they had to wait an hour at the station by the lake. The driver, fireman and the guard usually brought something from the refreshment lady and went and sat in Beatrice. The refreshment lady always comes home on this train. Time passed slowly today for Peter Sam. At last his driver and fireman came. "Beep, beep, hurry up please," he whistled to the passengers, and they came strolling back to the station. Peter Sam was sizzling with impatience. How awful, he thought, if we miss Henry's train. The last passengers arrived. The guard was ready with his flag and whistle. The refreshment lady walked across the platform. Then it happened. The guard says that Peter Sam was too impatient. Peter Sam says he was sure he heard a whistle anyway, and he started. Come quickly, he puffed. "Stop, stop, stop," wailed the coaches. "You've left her behind, you've left her behind." The guard whistled and waved his red flag. The driver, looking back, saw the refreshment lady shouting and running after the train. "Bother!" groaned Peter Sam as he stopped. "We're sure to miss Henry now." The refreshment lady climbed into Beatrice and they started again. "We're sure to be late, we're sure to be late," tentered Peter Sam frantically. His driver had to keep kicking him. "Steady, boy, steady." Peter Sam whistled at the stations. "Hurry, please hurry," and they reached the big station just as Henry steamed in. "Hooray," said Peter Sam, "we've caught him after all," and he let off steam with relief. "Not bad, youngster," said Henry loftily. The refreshment lady shook her fist at Peter Sam. "What do you mean by leaving me behind?" she demanded. "I'm sorry, refreshment lady, but I was worried about our passengers," and he told her what Henry had said. The refreshment lady laughed. "You silly engine," she said. "Henry wouldn't dare go. He's got to wait. It's a guaranteed connection." "Well," said Peter Sam, "well, where's that Henry?" But Peter Sam was too late that time, for Henry had chortled away. Percy the Small Engine. Percy and the Signal. Percy is a little green tank engine who works in the yard at the big station. He's a funny little engine and loves playing jokes. These jokes sometimes get him into trouble. "Pip, pip, pip," he whistled one morning. "Hurry up, Gordon, the train's ready." Gordon thought he was late and came puffing out. "Ha ha ha," laughed Percy, and showed him a train of dirty coal trucks. Gordon didn't go back to the shed. He stayed on a siding thinking how to pay Percy out. "Stay in the shed today," Percy squeaked to James. "The Fat Controller will come and see you." James was a conceited engine. He thought, "the Fat Controller knows I'm a fine engine, ready for anything. It wants me to pull a special train." James stayed where he was, and nothing his driver and fireman could do would make him move. But the Fat Controller never came, and the other engines grumbled dreadfully. They had to do James's work as well as their own. At last an inspector came. "Show a wheel, James," he said crossly. "You can't stay here all day." "The Fat Controller told me to stay here," answered James sulkily. "He sent a message this morning." "He did not," retorted the inspector. "How could he? He's away for a week." "Oh," said James. "Oh!" and he came quickly out of the shed. "Where's Percy?" Percy had wisely disappeared. When the Fat Controller came back he did see James, and Percy too. Both engines wished he hadn't. James and Gordon wanted to pay Percy out, but Percy kept out of their way. One morning, however, he was so excited that he forgot to be careful. "I say, you engines," he bubbled, "I'm to take some trucks to Thomas's Junction. The Fat Controller chose me specially. He must know I'm a really useful engine." "More likely he wants you out of the way," grunted James, but Gordon gave James a wink. "Ah, yes," said James, "just so. You were saying, Gordon?" "James and I were just speaking about signals at the junction. We can't be too careful about signals, but then I needn't to say that to a really useful engine like you, Percy." Percy felt flattered. "Of course not," he said. "We had spoken of backing signals," put in James. "They need extra special care, you know. Would you like me to explain?" "No, thank you, James," said Percy airily. "I know all about signals," and he bustled off importantly. James and Gordon solemnly exchanged winks. Percy was a little worried as he set out. "I wonder what backing signals are," he thought. "Never mind, I'll manage. I know all about signals." He puffed crossly to his trucks and felt better. He saw a signal just outside the station. "Bother," he said, "it's at danger." "Oh, oh, oh!" screamed the trucks as they bumped into each other. Presently the signal moved to show "line clear." Its arm moved up instead of down. Percy had never seen that sort of signal before. He was surprised. Down means go, he thought, and up means stop. So upper still must mean go back. I know, it's one of those backing signals. How clever of me to find that out. "Come on, Percy," said his driver. "Off we go." But Percy wouldn't go forward, and his driver had to let him back in order to start at all. "I am clever," thought Percy. "Even my driver doesn't know about backing signals," and he started so suddenly that the truck screamed again. "Whoa, Percy," called his driver. "Stop, you're going the wrong way." "But it's a backing signal," Percy protested, and told him about Gordon and James. The driver laughed and explained about signals that point up. "Oh dear," said Percy, "let's start quickly before they come and see us." But it was too late. Gordon swept by with the express and saw everything. The engines talked about signals that night. They thought the subject was funny. They laughed a lot. Percy thought they were being very silly. The 8 famous engines. Gordon goes foreign. Lots of people travel to the big station at the end of the line. Engines from the other railways sometimes pull their trains. These engines stay the night and go home the next day. Gordon was talking to one of these. "When I was young and green," he said, "I remember going to London. Do you know the place? The station's called King's Cross." "King's Cross," snorted the engine. "London's Euston. Everybody knows that." "Rubbish," said Duck. "London's Paddington. I know. I worked there." They argued till they went to sleep. They argued when they woke up. They were still arguing when the other engine went away. Stupid thing. "Stupid thing," said Gordon crossly. "I've no patience." "Stupid yourself," said Duck. "London's Paddington. Paddington, do you hear?" "Stop arguing," James broke in. "You make me tired. You both agreed about something anyway." "What's that?" "London's not Euston," laughed James. "Now shut up." Gordon rolled away, still grumbling. "I'm sure it's King's Cross. I'll go and prove it." But that was easier said than done. London lay beyond the big station at the end of the line. Gordon had to stop there. Another engine then took his train. "If I didn't stop," he thought, "I could go to London." One day he ran right through the station. Another time he tried to start before the fireman could uncouple the coaches. He tried all sorts of tricks, but it was no good. His driver checked him every time. "Oh dear," he thought sadly, "I'll never get there." One day he pulled the express to the station as usual. His fireman uncoupled the coaches, and he ran onto his siding to wait till it was time to go home. The coaches waited and waited at the platform, but their engine didn't come. A porter ran across and spoke to Gordon's driver. "The inspector's on the platform. He wants to see you." The driver climbed down from the cab and walked over to the station. He came back in a few minutes, looking excited. "Hello," said the fireman. "What's happened?" "The engine for the express turned over when it was coming out of the yard. Nothing else can come in or out. They want us to take the train to London. I said we would if the Fat Controller agreed. They telephoned, and he said we could do it. How's that?" "Fine," said the fireman. "We'll show them what the Fat Controller's engines can do." "Come on," said Gordon. "Let's go." He rolled quickly over the crossings and backed onto the train. It was only a few minutes before the guard blew his whistle, but Gordon thought it was ages. Come on," he puffed to the coaches. Come on. "We're going to town, we're going to town," sang the coaches slowly at first, then faster and faster. Gordon found that London was a long way away. "Never mind," he said. "I like a good long run to stretch my wheels." But all the same he was glad when London came in sight. The Fat Controller came into his office the next morning. He looked at letters on his desk. One had a London postmark. "I wonder how Gordon's getting on," he said. The station master knocked and came in. He looked excited. "Excuse me, sir, have you seen the news?" "Not yet. Why?" "Just look at this, sir." The Fat Controller took the newspaper. "Goodness gracious me," he said. "There's Gordon. Headlines too. Famous engine at London station. Police called to control crowds." The Fat Controller read on, absorbed. Gordon returned the next day. The Fat Controller spoke to his driver and fireman. "I see you had a good welcome in London." "We certainly did, sir. We signed autographs till our arms ached, and Gordon had his photograph taken from so many directions at once that he didn't know which way to look." "Good," smiled the Fat Controller. "I expect he enjoyed himself. Didn't you, Gordon?" "No, sir, I didn't." "Why ever not?" "London's all wrong," answered Gordon sadly. "They've changed it. It isn't King's Cross anymore. It's St. Pancras." Duck and the Diesel Engine. A close shave. Duck made his way to Edward Station. "It's not fair. Diesel has made the Fat Controller and all the engines think I'm horrid." Edward smiled. "I know you aren't," he said, "and so does the Fat Controller. You wait and see." Duck felt happier with Edward. He helped him with his trucks and coaches, and sometimes helped foreign engines by pushing their trains up the hill. But Gordon, Henry and James never spoke to him at all. One day he pushed behind a goods train and helped it to the top. "Beep, beep, goodbye," he called, and rolled gently over the crossing to the other line. Duck loved coasting downhill, running easily with the wind whistling past. He hummed a little tune. Diddy-da-dum, da-dee-diddly. That sounds like a guard's whistle, he thought, but we haven't a guard. His driver heard it too and looked back. "Hurry, Duck, hurry," he called urgently. "There's been a breakaway. Some trucks are chasing us." There were 20 heavily loaded trucks. They laughed. "We've broken away, we've broken away, we've broken away." And before the signalman could change the point, they followed Duck onto the down line and hurtled after Duck, bumping and swaying with ever-increasing speed. The guards say there the trucks had knocked him off his van. He got up and ran behind, blowing his whistle to attract the driver's attention. "Now what?" asked the fireman. "As fast as we can," said the driver grimly. "Then they'll catch us gradually." They raced through Edward Station, whistling furiously, but the trucks caught them up with a shuddering jar. The fireman climbed back and the van's brakes came on with a scream. Braking carefully, the driver was gaining control. "Another clear mile and we'll do it," he said, and they swept round a bend. "Oh, glory, look at that!" A passenger train was just pulling out on their line from the station ahead. The driver leapt to his reverser. "Hard over, full steam, whistle." "It's up to you now, Duck," he said. Duck put every ounce of weight of steam against the trucks. They felt his strength. "On, on," they yelled. But Duck was holding him now. "I must stop them, I must." The station came nearer and nearer. The last coach cleared the platform. "It's too late," Duck groaned, and shut his eyes. He felt a sudden swerve and slid shuddering and groaning along a siding where a barber had set up shop in a wooden shed in the yard. He was shaving a customer. There was a sliding, groaning crash, and part of the wall caved in. The customer jumped nervously, but the barber held him. "Don't worry, it's only an engine," he said calmly, and went on lathering. "Beg pardon, sir," gasped Duck. "Excuse my intrusion." "No, I won't," said the barber crossly. "You've threatened my customers and spoilt my paint. I'll teach you," and he lathered Duck's face all over. Poor Duck. They were putting the trucks away when the fat controller arrived. The barber was telling the workmen what he thought. "I do not like engines popping through my walls," he fumed. "They disturb my customers." "I appreciate your feelings," said the fat controller, "and will gladly repair the damage. But you must know that this engine and this crew have prevented a serious accident. You and many others might have been badly hurt." The fat controller paused impressively. "It was a very close, shave," he said. "Oh," said the barber. "Oh, excuse me." He ran into his shop, fetched a basin of water, and washed Duck's face. "I'm sorry, Duck," he said. "I didn't know you were being a brave engine." "That's all right, sir," said Duck. "I didn't know that either." "You were very brave indeed," said the fat controller kindly. "I'm proud of you. I shall tell Shitty Ochura about you next time he comes." "Oh, sir." Duck felt happier than he had done for weeks. "And now," said the fat controller, "when you are mended, you are coming home." "Home, sir? Do you mean the yard?" "Of course." "But, sir, they don't like me. They like Diesel." "Not now," the fat controller smiled. "After you went, he told lies about Henry, so I sent him packing. The engines are sorry and want you home." So when a few days later he came home shining with new paint, there was a really rousing welcome for Duck, the Great Western Engine. The Little Old Engine. Home at last. Peter Sam wanted to start work, but the thin controller wouldn't let him. "Another day's rest will do you good," he said. "Besides, I've got a surprise for you." "For me, sir? How nice, sir. What is it, sir?" "Wait and see," smiled the thin controller. The surprise was Skarloey. "Oh," said Peter Sam, "I am glad you've come home." They lit Skarloey's fire and he sizzled happily. "I feel all excited," he said, "just like a young engine. I am longing to pull my dear old coaches again. Are they running nicely?" "Yes, they're running well," Peter Sam answered. "But we have 5 other coaches now." Skarloey was interested. "Oh," he said, "tell me all about them." "Well, Cora is a guard's van. She isn't as big as Beatrice and she hasn't a ticket window, but I like her best. She was my guard's van in the old days. Ada, Jane and Mabel, they have no roofs. Sir Handel says they're trucks, but they have seats, said Peter Sam. So I say that coaches. What do you think, Skarloey? The old engine smiled. If they have seats, they are coaches, he said firmly. Sir Handel likes Gertrude and Millicent best. Peter Sam went on. He always tries to take them alone. They have bogies, and he says they're the only real coaches we have. They remind him of when he used to pull our express. Both have seats for passengers, but Millicent has a guard as well. He sells tickets and travels in a tiny cupboard place. I don't like that, he remarked earnestly. Guards are very important. They shouldn't be put into cupboards. Skarloey said nothing, so Peter Sam continued. Did Rusty help you off your truck? Yes, he says he's come to mend the line and do odd jobs. I like him, smiled Skarloey. So do I. Peter Sam explained how kind Rusty was when he had his accident. It's a pity Duncan doesn't like him. Who is Duncan? He came as a spare engine after my accident. Is he useful? He'll pull anything, and I'm sure he means well, but he's bouncy and rude. He used to work in a factory, and his language is often strong. I understand, said Skarloey gravely. Just then the telephone rang, and Skarloey's driver and fireman climbed into his cab. Come on now, boy, they said. Duncan is stuck in the tunnel, and we'll have to get him out. Skarloey was pleased. He wanted the run and looked forward to meeting Duncan. They found Cora and some workmen and hurried up the line. How nice and smooth the rails are, thought Skarloey. They've mended all the old bumps. Rusty has helped to do that. I must tell him how nice it is. Duncan was stuck at the far end of the tunnel. His coaches were outside, and the passengers were helping the driver and fireman to dislodge some rocks wedged between the top of his cab and the tunnel roof. Duncan was very cross. I'm a plain blunt engine, he kept saying. I speak as I find. Tunnels should be tunnels and not rabbit holes. This railway is no good at all. Don't be silly, snapped his driver. This tunnel is quite big enough for engines who don't want to rock and roll. They cleared away the rocks, and Skarloey pulled Duncan and his coaches safely through. Cora was left on a siding, and the workmen stayed to make sure everything was safe. Duncan grumbled all the way home, but Skarloey paid no attention. The Finn controller was waiting for them. Listen to me, Duncan, he said. There is nothing wrong with that tunnel. You stuck in it because you tried to do rock and roll. If it happens again, I'll cut down your cab, and your funnel too. Duncan was abashed, and was neither plain nor blunt for at least a whole evening. The twin engines, the deputation. He'll send us away for sure, Donald. I'm thinking you're right there, Dougie. The luck's side been against us. An engine dunna ken what to do for the best. Snow came early that year. It was heavier than usual. It stayed too and choked the lines. Most engines hate snow. Donald and Douglas were used to it. They knew what to do. Their drivers spoke to the inspector, and they were soon coupled back to back with a van between their tenders, then each with a snowplough on their fronts. They set to work and puffed busily backwards and forwards, patrolling the line. Generally the snow slipped away easily, but sometimes they found deeper drifts. Then they would charge them again, and again, snorting, slipping, puffing, panting, they had forced their way through. Presently they came to a drift which was larger than most. They charged it, and they were just backing for another try when there was a feeble whistle. People waved and shouted. "Lost shakes, Donald! It's Henry! Do not fast yourself, Henry! Wait a while! We'll have you out!" The fat controller was returning soon. The twins looked glum. "He'll send us back for sure," they said. "It's a shame," sympathised Percy. "A lot of nonsense about a signal box," grumbled Gordon. "Too many of those, if you asked me." That freight van too," put in James. "Good riddance, that's what I say." "They were splendid in the snow," said Henry. "It isn't fair." They all agreed that something must be done, but none knew what. One day Percy talked to Edward about it. "What you need," said Edward, "is a deputation." He explained what that was. Percy ran back quickly. "Edward says we need a depostation," he told the others. "Of course," put in Gordon. "The question is..." "What is a desperation?" asked Henry. "It's when engines tell the fat controller something's wrong and ask him to put it right." "Did you say tell the fat controller?" asked Duck thoughtfully. There was a long silence. "I propose," said Gordon at last, "that Percy be our own disputation." "I?" squeaked Percy. "But I can't." "Rubbish, Percy," said Henry. "It's easy." "That's settled then," said Gordon. Poor Percy wished it wasn't. "Hello, Percy. It's nice to be back." Percy jumped. Some trucks went flying. "Oh, yes, sir. Please, sir." "You look nervous, Percy. What's the matter?" "Oh, please, sir, they made me a desperation, sir, to speak to you, sir. I don't like it, sir." The Fat Controller pondered. "Do you mean a deputation?" he asked. "Yes, sir, please, sir. It's Donald and Douglas, sir. They say, sir, that if you send them away, sir, they'll be turned into scrap, sir. That would be dreadful, sir. Please don't send them away." "Thank you, Percy. That will do." He walked away. "I had a deputation yesterday," said the Fat Controller. "I understand your feelings, but I do not approve of interference." He paused impressively. "Donald and Douglas, I hear that your work in the snow was good. What colour paint would you like?" The twins were surprised. "Oh, blue, sir, please." "Very well, but your names will be painted on you. We'll have no more mistakes." "Thank you, sir. Does this mean that the both of us—" The Fat Controller smiled. "It means—" But the rest of his speech was drowned in the delighted chorus of cheers and whistles. The twins were here to stay. Branch line engines. Thomas comes to breakfast. Thomas the tank engine has worked his branch line for many years. "You know just where to stop, Thomas," laughed his driver. "You could almost manage without me." Thomas had become conceited. He didn't realise his driver was joking. "Driver says I don't need him now," he told the others. "Don't be so daft," snorted Percy. "I'd never go without my driver," said Toby earnestly. "I'd be frightened." "Pah!" boosted Thomas. "I'm not scared." "You'd never dare." "I would then. You'll see." It was dark next morning when the firelighter came. Thomas drowsed comfortably as the warmth spread through his boiler. He woke again in daylight. Percy and Toby were still asleep. Thomas suddenly remembered. "Silly stick-in-the-muds," he chuckled. "I'll show them. Driver hasn't come yet, so here goes." He cautiously tried first one piston, then the other. "They're moving," he whispered. "I'll just go out, then I'll stop and wheesh. That'll make them jump." Very, very quietly he headed for the door. Thomas thought he was being clever, but really he was only moving because a careless cleaner had meddled with his controls. He soon found his mistake. He tried to wheesh, but he couldn't. He tried to stop, but he couldn't. He just kept rolling along. "The buffers will stop me," he thought hopefully, but that siding had no buffers. It just ended at the road. Thomas's wheels left the rails and crunched the tarmac. "Horrors!" he exclaimed, and shut his eyes. He didn't dare look at what was coming next. Master's family were having breakfast. They were eating ham and eggs. There was a crash. The house rocked. Broken glass tinkled. Plaster peppered their plates. Thomas had collected a bush on his travels. He peered anxiously into the room through its leaves. He couldn't speak. The station master grimly strode out and shut off steam. His wife picked up her plate. "You miserable engine," she scolded. "Just look what you've done to our breakfast. Now I shall have to cook some more." She banged the door. More plaster fell. This time it fell on Thomas. Thomas felt depressed. The plaster was tickly. He wanted to sneeze, but he didn't dare in case the house fell on him. Nobody came for a long time. Everyone was much too busy. At last workmen propped up the house with strong poles. They laid rails through the garden, and Donald and Douglas, puffing hard, managed to haul Thomas back to the yard. His funnel was bent. Bits of fencing, the bush, and a broken window frame festooned his front, which was badly twisted. The twins laughed and left him. He was in disgrace. "You are a very naughty engine." "I know, sir. I'm sorry, sir." Thomas's voice was muffled behind his bush. "You must go to the works and have your front end mended. It'll be a long job." "Yes, sir," faltered Thomas. "Meanwhile," said the Fat Controller, "a diesel rail car will do your work." "A diesel, sir?" Thomas spluttered. "Yes, Thomas. Diesels always stay in their sheds till they are wanted. Diesels never gallivant off to breakfast in station masters' houses." The Fat Controller turned on his heel and sternly walked away. Gallant Old Engine. Gallant Old Engine. "I'm ashamed of you, Duncan," said Skarloey. "You should think of your passengers." "Passengers are just nuisances. They're always complaining." Skarloey was shocked. "That's no way to talk," he said. "Passengers are our coal and water. No passengers means no trains. No trains means no railway. Then we'd be on the scrap heap, my engine, and don't you forget it. Thank goodness Rheneas is coming home soon. Perhaps he'll teach you some sense before it's too late." "What has Rheneas got to do with it?" "Rheneas saved our railway," said Skarloey. "Please tell us about it," begged Peter Sam. "Well, it was the year before you came," said the old engine. "Things were very bad. We were on our last wheels. Mr. Hugh was driver and fireman, while the Finn Controller was guard. He did everything else too, and helped Mr. Hugh mend us in the shed. We expect 2 fresh engines next year, they told us, but we must keep the trains going for now. If we don't, our railway will close." "How awful," said Peter Sam in sympathy. "I tried hard, though I couldn't do much, but Rheneas understood. 'It's my turn now,' he said. 'You've done more than your share of hard work.' He was often short of steam, but he always tried to struggle to a station and rest there." "That," said Skarloey earnestly, "is most important with passengers." "Pah!" exclaimed Duncan. "Passengers," Skarloey continued, "don't mind stopping at stations. They can get out and walk. That's what stations are for, but they get very cross if we stop at wrong places, like viaducts. Then they say we're a bad railway and never come back." "I remember Rheneas stopping in a wrong place once," said Skarloey. "He couldn't help it, but he made up for it afterwards." That afternoon he had damp rails and a full train. There were passengers even in Beatrice the guard's van. His wheels slipped dreadfully on the steep bit after the first station, but they gripped at last. "The worst is over," he thought. "Now we're away. Come along," he sang to the coaches. "Come along all." "Ah, I've got cramp," he groaned. He stopped, unable to move on the loneliest part of the line. The Finn Controller and Mr. Hugh examined him carefully. The passengers watched and waited. Rheneas eyed them anxiously. They looked cross. At last the Finn Controller stood up. "Your valve gear on one side has jammed," he said. "We've unfastened the rods and tied them up. Now, Rheneas," as he went on, "we need to reach the next station. Can you pull us there on one cylinder?" "I'll try, sir, but the next station isn't the right station. Will the passengers be cross?" "Don't worry," smiled the Finn Controller. "They know we can't reach the top station today." The Finn Controller sanded the rails. Passengers from Beatrice pushed behind. Mr. Hugh gently eased over the regulator. The train jerked and began to move. "I'll do it! I'll do it!" Everyone cheered, but Rheneas heard nothing. "The Finn Controller is relying on me. If I fail, the railway will close. It mustn't. I'll get there or burst." Everything blurred as he was too tired to move another yard, but he did, and another, until, "I'm here at last," he sighed with relief. "I am proud of you indeed," said Mr. Hugh. All Rheneas remembered about the journey down was having to go on at the big station. The passengers thanked him. "We expected a long walk," they said, "but you brought us home. We'll come again and bring our friends here. Our gallant little engines," said the Finn Controller. "When you've rested, we will mend you ready for tomorrow." Was Rheneas always ready for tomorrow? "Always," smiled Skarloey. "Whatever happened, Rheneas always pulled his trains." It was Duncan who then broke the silence. "Thank you for telling us about Rheneas," he said. "I was wrong. Passengers are important after all." All the little engines were at the wharf on the day Rheneas came home. Some of the Fat Controller's engines were there too. Edward pushed Rheneas and his trucks to the siding, and Skarloey pulled him neatly to his own rails. This was the signal for a chorus of whistles for engines large and small that you never heard such a noise in all your life. The owner, Rheneas, and other important people made speeches. The band played and everyone was very happy, but Rheneas was the happiest of all in his own place. That night next to his friend Skarloey, "This helps a little engine to feel," he said, "that at last he has really come home." Stepney the Bluebell engine bowled out. The big diesel surveyed the shed. "Not bad," he said. "I've seen worse. At least you're all clean." "The engine's gaped. It's not your fault," he went on, "but you're all out of date. Your controller should scrap you and get engines like me. A fill of oil, a touch on the starter, and I'm off, with no bother and no waiting. They have to fuss around you for hours before you're ready." At last the engines found their voices. An inspector had to come and stop the noise. They held an indignation meeting early next morning round the turntable. "Disgraceful," grumbled Gordon. "Disgusting," said James. "Despicable," spluttered Henry. "To say such things to us," burst out Donald and Douglas. "It's to teach him a lesson we'd be wanting." But no one had any good ideas, and at last they all went off to work, except for Duck and Stepney. "Never mind," said Duck. "We'll be sure to think of something." "We'll have to be quick then," warned Stepney. But their chance came sooner than expected. The diesel purred comfortably. He was being warmed up well before time. An inspector watched a fitter making adjustments. The wind tightened the inspector's hat. The fitter replaced the air intake cover. "OK, mate," he said. Diesel saw his coaches waiting at the platform. He rolled proudly towards them. "Look at me, Duck and Stepney. Now I'll show you something." He advanced a few yards, and suddenly he'd coughed, faltered, choked, and stopped. The inspector meanwhile had seen nothing of this. He was looking for his hat. "Can we help you at all?" asked Duck and Stepney sweetly. Diesel seethed with fury as they pushed him back to the shed. "My hat!" exclaimed the inspector as the cavalcade went by. "Bother your hat," said the Fat Controller crossly. "The train's due out in 10 minutes. You'll have to take it, Duck." Duck looked doubtful, but when Stepney asked, "Can I help him, sir?" he felt better. The Fat Controller was pleased too, and hurried away almost cheerfully to make the arrangements. The engines and their crews made careful plans, so as they backed down they dropped sand on the rails, rolling it firm with their wheels. Both controllers were there to see them off. "Gordon will take over from halfway," said the Fat Controller, "so get the train there. Never mind about being late. Good luck." "Don't worry, sir," smiled Stepney. "We'll get there and be early too." They stood waiting, sizzling with excitement, ready and eager to be off at last. The guard's flag waved. The engines dug their wheels into the sand and gave a mighty heave. Come on," said Duck, while Stepney barked excitedly in front. Moving carefully over the points, they reached the open line. "Now for a sprint," puffed Stepney. "I'm ready when you are," puffed Duck. Faster and faster they went till their wheels were turning at such speed that the side rods were merely blurs under clear signals. They whizzed through Edward Station and charged at Gordon's Hill beyond. They felt the drag of their 15 coaches here. It was hard work, but once over the top, the last 10 miles were plain running and they swept into the big station in fine style. "Hello," said Gordon, "you're early. That's one in the headlamp for old Diesel. Have you heard the latest?" He chuckled. "Diesel had sucked the inspector's hat into his air pipe. He broke down. James says he's sick as boiler sludge and sulking in the shed. Out of date, are we? Ho, 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 ho." And still laughing, Gordon puffed away. Everyone was sad next day when Stepney had to go. All the engines who could came to see him off. The Fat Controller made a speech, and so did Stepney's controller. Donald and Douglas made everyone sing Auld Lang Syne, and then Stepney and his controller puffed off to a chorus of cheers and whistles. "Goodbye, Stepney, come again. Goodbye, goodbye." But what about Diesel? He slipped away the night before. He said goodbye to no one, but left 2 things behind: the nasty smell of bad manners and a battered bowler hat. Mountain Engines, Devil's Back. As a punishment they took Lord Harry's name away and put him at the back of the shed. He soon heard Culdey's story about Godred. "Pah," he said, "that couldn't happen to me," but he was anxious all the same. "Please, sir, I'm sorry. I'll try to be different." "The passengers don't trust them," said the manager. "You will take the truck instead." So number 6 took supplies to Summit Hotel, and he took gangers to work in the morning and brought them home. In the evening he found it dull and grumbled. "It's important work," protested Wilfred, "and tough too." Tough, that little lot? Yes, tough, said Cordy. Have you ever been across Devil's Back in a gale? No, said number 6 thoughtfully, but I see what you mean. A mile below summit the line runs along a rocky ridge, always there is wind. Sometimes it is gentle, at others it is fierce and very dangerous. Then all passenger trains stopped at Devil's Back station, but whatever the weather, store trains and rescue trains must get through. A few days later, number 6 reached Devil's Back at 5:15. He was on his way with the truck to fetch railway staff from the summit. All clear now, said the station master, as the last down train left the loop. Don't waste time, the wind's rising. We have a gale in half an hour. He went inside to set the points, but the telephone rang. He came out looking worried. There's trouble, he told the crew. Come in and discuss it out of the wind. They filled the truck's big tank with water and sandbags to ballast the van. The wind whistled round them as they worked. What is all this? Asked number 6. There's been a climbing accident, explained his driver. Culdee and Catherine are bringing up a doctor and a rescue team, but Catherine's too light to stand this gale, so we'll go up ourselves. The water and the sandbank will steady us, and if you can keep going, we have a good chance of getting through. Can you do it? I'll have a jolly good try, said number 6. When Culdee arrived, the doctor and the rescue team changed trains. The manager was there, too. Splendid, he said when he saw the preparations. Now, number 6, it's all up to you. The guards signalled the driver and they were off. A real job at last, crowed number 6 exultantly. Now I'll show 'em, now I'll show 'em. Leaving the shelter of the station, the full force of the gale struck him like a blow. Culdee and Catherine saw him waver. Go it, they yelled. Number 6 heard them for a moment. Next, he was battling all alone. He didn't feel so brave now. All he wanted was to get out of the vicious, stinging, icy wind which seemed to come at him from all directions. The truck lurched and swayed as the wind tore at it. It whimpered and groaned as though in pain. She wants to go back, thought number 6, and so do I, but we can't. The manager is relying on me to save those climbers. We must go through, we must. Slowly, doggedly, he struggled on till in shelter again on the other side. They climbed the final steep ascent and rolled triumphant into the summit station. They brought the climbers safely down and an ambulance whisked them to hospital. Next morning their leader came to say, "Thank you, my friend. Patrick has said he hurt himself helping me, but he's mending now thanks to you and your brave engine. We'd all be proud if you could call him Patrick too." The manager smiled. "Well, number 6, would you like that?" they asked. "Oh, sir, yes, please. Patrick and the others are all good friends. He is still brave and still ready to take risks when needed, but he knows now that it is stupid to take them just for the sake of showing off." Very old engines. Stick in the mud. The manager was as good as his word. "Skarloey," he continued, "I came home from the works with 6 wheels and a cab. A cab is the latest thing for engines, he told me. I hope it will cheer you up after your disappointment." Rheneas chuckled. It cheered him up too much. "Those silly cabs make him worse. Such a handsome engine," he tittered. 6 wheels and a cab so distinguished, my dears. It's a pleasure to see him." Skarloey soon got too big for his wheels. Skarloey would smile ruefully. "Oh, he did, he said. Go on, Rheneas. He boasted about his cab till I was tired," said Rheneas. "You should get one like me and be up to date," he would say. "No, thank you. You look like a snail with a house on your back. You don't go much faster either." "Slow, am I? Let me tell you who is late 3 times last week." "Oh, it's no use talking. You're just an old stick in the mud." Rheneas called Skarloey more names, and they quarrelled and ended up back to back, not speaking. It went on for days and days. One dark Monday morning, Skarloey had to take the workman's train to the quarry. It had rained for 3 days. "You always pick on me for wet days," he complained. "You said, Mr. Bobby, I've got a cab to keep us dry. Come on." Skarloey slipped and snorted on the damp rails. He began to wonder if cabs were worth it. An hour later, Rheneas was warming up when Skarloey's guard came coasting down in an empty truck. He stopped by the shed. "There's a landslide beyond the tunnel," he said. "Skarloey's running into it and he's stuck." "So are we, Rheneas. Look lively." "I'm sorry, Mr. Peter, but that Skarloey's too swanky. He says I'm a stick in the mud. He can jolly well stick in the mud himself. It serves him right." "But," went on the driver, Says poor Mr. Bobby in the quarry, when does it serve them right too? The guard says the mud looks like treacle. Oh dear, said Rheneas, that won't never do. We must save them before they get sucked in, and off we puffed with 2 trucks and some workmen. Things weren't too bad after all. The men had partly cleared the line and levered Skarloey back. He was hissing and grumbling dreadfully, but they didn't listen to him. He cleared the rest of the line. Rheneas pushed Skarloey out of the way before taking the quarterman to work. Mr. Bobby cleaned and oiled his wheels and motioned so when Rheneas returned with the coaches he could help him back to the shed. I'm sorry I was swanky, he said. Thank you for helping me. Not at all, Rheneas said. Rheneas was still cross, then Skarloey began to laugh. I'm a stick in the mud after all, he giggled helplessly. Not you. Rheneas laughed too. He couldn't help it. He looked so funny, and they were laughing until the cleaners came. It was still laughing when he left. Poor engines, they said, tapping their foreheads. But they weren't mad. They learnt sense, and they've been firm friends ever since it was nearly dark. The listeners stirred and stretched. Thank you, Skarloey and Rheneas, they said. Now you've told us about the old days, we can give you both a splendid birthday next week. Mainline engines. Wrong road. Thomas's branch line is important, and so is Edward's. They both bring in valuable traffic, but their track and bridges are not so strong as those on the main line. That is why the Fat Controller does not allow the heavier engines, such as Gordon and Henry, to run on them. If, however, you had heard Gordon talking to Edward a short while ago, you would have thought that the Fat Controller had forbidden him to run branch lines for quite another reason. It's not fair, grumbled Gordon. What isn't fair? Asked Edward. Letting branch line diesels pull main line trains. Never mind, Gordon. I'm sure Boko will let you pull his trucks sometimes. That would make it quite fair. Gordon spluttered furiously. I won't pull Boko's dirty trucks. I won't run on branch lines. Why not? It would be a nice change. The Fat Controller would never approve, said Gordon loftily. Branch lines are vulgar. He puffed away in a dignified manner. Edward chuckled and followed him to the station. Gordon, his driver and his fireman all say it was the lady's fault. She wore a green floppy hat and was saying goodbye to a friend sitting in the coach near Mr. Guard's van. It was almost time to start. The fireman looked back. He was new to the job. He couldn't see the guard, but he did see something green waving. He thought it was the flag. Right away, mate, he called. But the guard had not waved his flag. When Gordon started, he left some luggage, several indignant passengers, and the guard all standing on the platform. Every evening, 2 fast trains leave the big station within 5 minutes. The 6:25 is for Gordon's main line. Edward's at 6:30 runs along the branch. But by the time Gordon had been brought back, Edward's train was overdue. You've missed your path, Gordon, said the Fat Controller crossly. Now we must clear Edward's train before you can start. This should have put everything right with the least possible trouble, but control at the big station made things worse. They forgot to warn the signalman at Edward's junction about the change of plan. It was dark by the time the trains reached the junction, and you can guess what happened. Edward went through on the main line, while Gordon was switched to the branch. It took the Fat Controller several hours to sort out the tangle and pacify the passengers. In the end, Gordon was left with his fire drawn, cold and cross on one of Edward's sidings. Bill and Ben peeped into the yard next morning. They wondered if Boko had brought them some trucks. There were no trucks, but they didn't mind that. Teasing Gordon, they thought, would be much better fun. What's that? Asked Bill loudly. Shh, whispered Ben. It's Gordon. It looks like Gordon, but it can't be. Gordon never comes on branch lines. He thinks them vulgar. Gordon pretended he hadn't heard. If it isn't Gordon, said Ben, it's just a pile of old iron, which we'd better take to the scrapyard. No, Bill, this lot's useless for scrap. We'll take it to the harbour and dump it in the sea. Gordon was alarmed. I am Gordon. Stop, stop. The twins paid no attention. Gordon shut his eyes and prepared for the worst. The twins argued loudly and long. Bill favoured the scrapyard, while Ben said that cutting up in such places was something cruel. It would be kinder, he urged, to give these remains a quick end in the sea. Besides, he went on, they would make a lovely splash. Gordon could not view either prospect with any enthusiasm. Up to the time he had disapproved of diesels. They were, he considered, ugly, smelly, and noisy, but when he opened his eyes and saw Boko coming into the yard, he thought him the most beautiful sight he had ever seen. "Boko, my dear engine, save me!" Boko quickly sized up the situation and sent Bill and Ben about their business. They were cheeky at first, but Boko threatened to take away the trucks of coal he had brought for them. That made them behave at once. Gordon thought he was wonderful. "Those little demons," he said. "How do you do it?" "Ah, well," said Boko, "it's just a knack." Gordon thinks to this day that Boko saved his life, but we know that the twins were only teasing, don't we? Small railway engines. Useful railway. Mike had trouble with some sheep. He grumbled about them dreadfully. "They're silly," said Rex, "but they're useful." "What?" "Farmers," went on Rex, "sell their wool." "What's that?" "People make clothes from wool. You know, things they wear instead of paint." "Quite right." Rex. The engines were startled. The small controller stood in the doorway. "The farmers," he went on, "want us to take their wools to the market. If we do it well, they all know we're really useful, so you must all do your best." "But I don't understand, sir," Bert protested. "We can't drive sheep down the line, they wouldn't go straight." "Silly," said Rex. "We don't drive sheep, we take their wool in bales on trucks. It'll be easy." The small controller laughed. "Very well, Rex," he said. "You seem to know all about it, so you shall take the first train." They started loading at the lane, then Rex came gently down the line, stopping at all the farms and level crossings on the way. "Nearly finished," said his driver at last. "Only one more load and we're away." But he's reckoned without Willie and his tractor. Willie was late. He'd been dawdling. Rex's whistle roused him and he set off at top speed. "Your load's slipping," someone shouted. "Oh dear," thought Willie. "I can't stop now. I hope it'll hold." But it didn't hold quite enough. Willie dashed into the yard and swept round to bring his trailer alongside the line. The trailer tilted, a strain loosened the ropes, and the topmost wool bales slid sideways to the track. "Crumbs, crumbs!" burst out Willie. "That's torn it. I must warn Rex." He jumped down and ran along the line. Rex's trucks were running nicely. "I said it was easy. I said it was easy," he chanted happily to himself. Then everything happened at once. Willie waved and shouted, and behind Willie through the bridge, Rex flipped the bales lying on the track. "Stop, stop, stop!" he whistled. On, urged the trucks, but Rex's brakes checked them. "Oh," he groaned, and shut his eyes. His front hit something soft. He tilted sideways and found himself off the line, leaning against the cutting the side, while his driver felt him all over to find if he was hurt. When the small controller came, Willie said he was very sorry, and with his master's permission, he stayed and worked very hard clearing the mess. They put the trucks to rights, and Bert lost no time in taking him away. But Rex had to stay where he was. He didn't like that a bit. Trains kept passing, and passengers would point at him and say, "Oh, look, it's been an accident." Mike and Bert would laugh and remark how easy it was to pull wool trains. Poor Rex. They lifted Rex to the rails at last, and Bert and Mike helped him home. "That accident served me right for being swanky now," said Bert. "It wasn't your fault at all." "Sorry we laughed." This came from Bert. "The small controller is waiting." "I'm very proud of you all." He said thanks to Rex. The accident did little harm. Bert and Mike worked like heroes, and our customers all admired the way we managed. They thought we were a toy railway, but now they say we're really useful. They promised us plenty more work when the wool traffic is done. Enterprising engines. Tenders for Henry. "I'm not happy," complained Gordon. "Your firebox is out of order," said James. "No wonder after all that coal you had yesterday." "Hard work brings good appetite," snapped Gordon. "You wouldn't understand." "I know," put in Duck brightly. "It's boiler ache. I warned you about that standpipe on the other railway, but you drank Gallant." "It's not boiler ache," protested Gordon. "It's—" "Of course it is," said Henry. "That water's bad. It furs up your tubes. Your boiler must be full of sludge. Have a good wash out, then you'll feel a different engine." "Don't be vulgar," said Gordon huffily. Gordon backed down on his train, hissing mournfully. "Cheer up, Gordon," said the fat controller. "I can't, sir. The others say I've got boiler ache, but I haven't. Sir, I keep thinking about the dreadful state of the world. Sir, is it true what the diesels say?" "What do they say?" "The boast that they've abolished steam, sir." "Yes, Gordon, it is true." "What, sir, all my Doncaster brothers drawn the same time as me?" "All gone except one." The guard's whistle blew and Gordon puffed away sadly. "Poor old Gordon," said the Fat Controller. If only we could. Yes, I'll ask his owner at once." He hurried away. Arrangements took time, but one evening Gordon's driver ran back excited. "Wake up, Gordon, the Fat Controller's given you a surprise. Look." Gordon could hardly believe it. Backing towards him were two massive green tenders, and their engine shape was very much like his own. "It's Flying Scotsman," he gasped. "The Fat Controller's brought him to see me. Oh, thank you, sir." Gordon's toot of joy was drowned by Flying Scotsman as he drew happily alongside. Next day the two engines were photographed side by side. "You've changed a lot," smiled Flying Scotsman. "I had a rebuild at Crewe. They didn't do a proper Doncaster job, of course, but it serves. I had a rebuild too, and looked hideous, but my owner said I was an extra special engine, and made them give me back my proper shape." "Is that why you have two tenders, being special?" "No, you'd hardly believe it, Gordon, but over there they've hardly any coal and water." "But surely every proper railway—" "Exactly. You are lucky, Gordon, to have a controller who knows how to run railways." Everyone got on well with Flying Scotsman, except Henry. Henry was jealous. "Tenders are marks of distinction," he complained. "Everybody knows that. Why's he got two?" "He's famous," explained Duck. "He was the second to go 100 miles an hour. Besides, the other railway has no coal and water." "Pah!" sniffed Henry. "I can't believe that. I never boast," he continued, "but I always work hard enough for two. I deserve another tender for that." Duck whispered something to Donald. "Henry," asked Duck innocently, "would you like my tenders?" "Yours?" exclaimed Henry. "What have you got to do with tenders?" "All right," said Duck, "the deal's off. Would you like them, Donald?" "I wouldn't deprive you of the honour." "It is a great honour," said Duck thoughtfully, "but I'm only a tank engine, so I don't really understand tenders. Perhaps James might—" "I'm sorry I was rude," said Henry hastily. "How many tenders have you, and when could I have them?" "I have 6, and you can have them this evening." "6 lovely tenders," chortled Henry. "What a splendid sight I'll be. That'll show the others the sort of engine I am." Henry was excited. "Do you think it'll be all right?" he asked for the umpteenth time. "Of course," said Duck. "Just go where I told you, and they'll all be ready." Meanwhile word had gone round, and the others waited where they could get a good view. Henry was cheered to the echo. When he came, he wasn't a splendid sight at all. He had 6 tenders, true, but they were very old and very dirty, all filled with boiler sludge. "Have a good wash out, Henry," called a voice. "That's right, you'll feel a different engine now." Henry was not sure, but he thought the voice belonged to Gordon. Oliver the Western Engine. Resource and Sagacity. Oliver is a Great Western tank engine. The other railway wants to scrap him, so he ran away with Isabel, his faithful coach, and so did Toad the brake van. At the last moment they were nearly caught, but Douglas saved them. The Fat Controller was pleased, and said that when Oliver was mended he could help Duck with his branch line. "We'll give you all Great Western colours, right, Duck?" he said kindly. "That will help you to forget your troubles." "Oh, thank you, sir," said Oliver happily. Duck's branch starts from the big station. When all of them started work he often met other engines. There they all wanted to know about his adventures. "Amazing," Henry would remark. "Oliver," said James, "has resource—" "And sagacity," put in Gordon. "He is an example to us all." "You're too kind," giggled Oliver modestly, but he was only a tank engine. After all, no big engine had ever said admiring things to him before. I'm sorry to say that it made him puffed up in the smoke box. The Fat Controller rescued another coach called Dulcie. She trundled along with Isabel. Oliver sang, "Oh, Isabel's a funny coach and so is Dulcie too. If I didn't look after them I don't know what to do." Just listen to him, twittered Dulcie. "He's proud, he's conceited, and he's heading for trouble." Isabel sadly replied, I feel it in my frames, she shrieked. As they rounded a curve, Oliver just laughed. Henry says I'm amazing. He's right. What do I care for trouble? I just push it aside. All trucks are badly behaved, but ballast trucks are worst of all. Donald, Douglas and Duck warned Oliver about this. You think I can't manage, he said huffily. Gordon knows better. He says I'm sagacious. You may be good gracious, but say no more, Duck. It's maybe a pity, but the wee engine will have to learn for himself, argued Donald. Today, Oliver took the trucks by himself for the first time. He pulled the loaded ones to a siding and pushed empties to the chute. Then it came back full of confidence to take the loaded wagons away. The loaded trucks were comfortable and didn't want to move. They had just realised too that they had a different engine. Duck we know, they grumbled, and Donald and Douglas. What right is Oliver to poke his funnel in here? Look sharp, puffed Oliver. Smart alert. That's not the way to speak. Pay him out. The trucks moved off easily, and Oliver thought he had them in control. Trucks, he told himself proudly, don't play tricks on me. I'll arrange them on the middle road and start away as soon as Duck arrives. I can't understand why he says they are troublesome. They reached the station throat. All of his brakes came on with a groan, but brakes were useless against the loaded, surging trucks. They pushed forward, yelling, on, on, on. Oliver fought hard, but still they forced him on and on. Their efforts slackened. At last, I'm winning, he gasped. If only it was too late. One moment his rear wheels were on the rails, the next they had none, and he was bunkered down in the turntable well with a deluge of ballast all around him. When Duck arrived, he was stopped outside the station and flagged the platform. He surveyed the wreckage. Hello, Oliver, he remarked. Are you being a good gracious engine? Beg pardon, sir, but we don't really like this sort of surprise. Donald and Douglas will miss their turntable. Later that day, Donald and Douglas spoke punctually in Scots, and the fat controller spoke poignantly in English. All three left Oliver in no doubt at all, but so far from being sagacious, he was a very silly engine. Duke the Lost Engine. Grandpuff. Once upon a time, 3 little engines lived in their own little shed on their own little railway. Duke was brown, Falcon blue, and Stuart green. Duke was the oldest, and he had been the first engine on the line, and named after his grace, the Duke of Sodor. He was proud of this, and wanted everything just so. Whenever the others did anything they shouldn't, he would say, that would never suit his grace. Other engines came and went, but Duke outlasted them all. Stuart and Falcon used to call him Grandpuff. Duke was fond of them and tried to keep them in order. They were fond of him too, as he was so wise and kind, but they did get tired of hearing all about his grace. Sometimes they would wink at each other and chant solemnly, engines come and engines go, Grandpuff goes on forever. You impertinent scallywags, Duke would say. Whatever are young engines coming to nowadays? Oh, never mind, Grandpuff, we're only young once. Well, you'd better mind, unless you want to end up like number 2. Oh, Grandpuff, whatever happened? Number 2, said Duke, was American and cocky. He rode roughly and often came off the rails. I warned him to be careful. Listen, bud, he drawled. In the States we don't care a damn for a few spills. We do here, I said, but he just laughed. But he didn't laugh when the manager took away his wheels and said he was going to make him useful at last. Why? What did he do? He turned him into a pumping engine, that's what. He's still there behind our shed. Stuart and Falcon were unusually good for several days. Stuart and Falcon became really useful engines, and all 3 engines were happy together for many years. But hard times came. The mines closed one by one, and the engines had little to do. At last their line was closed too, and people came to buy the engines. We'll take Stuart and Falcon, they said, but no one wanted Duke. They thought him too old. Cheer up, Grandpuff, called Stuart as they went away. We'll find a nice railway, and then you can come and keep us in order. They all laughed bravely, but not one of them thought it would ever come true. Duke's driver and fireman oiled and greased him one last time. They sheeted him snugly and said goodbye. They had to go away and find work. Duke was alone and locked up in the shed. Where's his grace? He wondered. It's not like him to forget me. but his grace had sadly been killed in the war, and the new Duke, a boy, hadn't learned of his little engine. "Oh well," said Duke to himself, "I'll go to sleep. It'll help pass the time." Years passed. Winter torrents washed soils from the hills. Over the shed, trees and bushes grew all around. You wouldn't have known a shed was there, let alone a little engine asleep inside it. Have you guessed about Stuart and Falcon? Now yes, you're right. They came to the Finn Controller's Railway. He gave them new coats of paint and new names. Stuart became Peter Sam and Falcon Sir Handel. They prefer their new names. That was a long time ago, but they never forgot Grandpuff. They often talk about him when alone, and they were excited to hear that Duke was coming to Skarloey's and Rheneas's 100th birthday, but most disappointed with the Duke who actually came, for he was only a man. But we shall say no more, or I will spoil the next story. Tramway Engines. Ghost Train. And every year on the date of the accident, it runs again, plunging into the gap, shrieking like a lost soul. Percy, what are you talking about? The ghost train. Driver saw it last night. Where? Asked Thomas and Toby together. He didn't say, but it must have been on our line. He says ghost trains run as a warning to others. Ooh, he went on, it makes my wheels wobble just to think of it. Pah, said Thomas, you're just a silly little engine, Percy. I'm not scared. Thomas didn't believe in your ghost, said Percy next morning. His driver laughed. Neither do I. It was a pretend ghost on television. Percy was disappointed, but he was too busy all day with his stone trucks to think about ghosts. That evening he came back, light engine from the harbour. He liked running at night. He coasted along without any effort, the rails humming cheerfully under his wheels, and signal lights changing to green at his approach. He always knew just where he was, even in the dark. Crow's Farm crossing, he chunted happily. We shan't be long now. Sam had forgotten that Mr. Crow wanted a load of lime taken to 40-acre field. When he remembered it was nearly dark, he drove in a hurry, bumped over the crossing, and sank his cart's front wheels in mud at the field gate. The horse tried hard but couldn't move it. The cart's tail still fouled the railway. Sam gave it up. He unharnessed the horse and rode back to the farm for help. There's still time, he told himself. The next train isn't due for an hour. But he'd reckoned without Percy. Percy broke the cart to smithereens, and lime flew everywhere. They found no one at the crossing, so went on to the nearest signal box. Hello, said the signalman. What have you done to Percy? He's white all over. Percy's driver explained. I'll see to it, said the signalman, but you'd better clean Percy, or people will think he's a ghost. Percy chuckled. Do let's pretend I'm a ghost and scare Thomas. That'll teach him to say I'm a silly little engine. On their way they met Toby, who promised to help. Thomas was being oiled up for his evening train, when Toby hurried in saying, Percy's had an accident. Poor engine, said Thomas. Botheration, that means I'll be late. They've cleared the line for you, Toby went on, but there's something worse. Out with it, Toby, Thomas interrupted. I can't wait all evening. I've just seen something, said Toby in a shaky voice. It looked like Percy's ghost. It said it was coming here to warn us. Pah! Who cares? Don't be frightened, Toby. I'll take care of you. Percy approached the shed quietly and glided through it. Beep, 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 he shrieked. As had been arranged, Toby's driver and fireman quickly shut the doors. Let me in, let me in, said Percy in a spooky voice. No, no, answered Toby, not by the smoke of my chimney, chim, chim. I'll chuff and I'll puff and I'll break your door in. Oh dear, exclaimed Thomas, it's getting late. I've no idea. I must find Annie and Clarabel. He hurried out the other way. Percy was none the worse for his adventure. He was soon clean, but Thomas never returned. Next morning, Toby asked him where he'd been. Ah, well, said Thomas, I knew you'd be sad about Percy, and, I didn't like to, intrude. I slept in the goods shed and... Oh, he went on hurriedly. Sorry, can't stop. Got to see a coach about a train. And he shot off like a jackrabbit. Percy rolled up alongside. Well, 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 he exclaimed. What do you know about that? Anyone would think, chuckled Toby, that our Thomas had just seen a ghost.